We have to have no ordinance signs up first for the police to move these individuals on. The reason why I say that, because it's just becoming too obvious what is happening in our area. Every time somebody leaves soon, some soon for the lunch break and then leaves soon, somebody comes behind and rocks their house. So somebody's got to be in the area watching. The only people I see sitting around all day watching are those individuals that are sitting on the side of the shop. We used to have individuals out there before. We never had any problems. But these new individuals will come in, they'll beat them until they moved out of the area. And then all go sit around while the other in the bushes. What is the problem? You know, like I said, I don't know what's happening in the rest of the country, but the police don't even give statistics on what's happening, how many people are getting robbed, how many houses are getting robbed anymore. So you don't hear. Well, I know because I had to go there just yesterday from my job perspective in my own neighborhood, and then I arrived in the neighborhood at the house to find out the reason is because somebody go to that house. They are too comfortable breaking in these houses. You know, I mean, at the next way they go, they actually went down, broke the lock off the gate itself, took her own stepladder out, took them on, and started pushing the air conditioner out. Couldn't get the air conditioner out. Went on and broke the bathroom and everything right there. That's time. Somebody has to know that they have to be comfortable in the area to do things like that. You know? When they got my house, they have to be comfortable. Right? Because they took my son and they went through everything. You know? And like I said, we need to do something. You say we need to police ourselves, we need to start in areas like that. So, begging Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Reese, see what you can do about putting something together. First and foremost, see if we can get new ordinance signs up there so that the police can tackle these individuals and move them on from sitting outside, getting intoxicated and being a nuisance to everybody that comes into the shop. I can't prove this thing, but I only have suspicions because I don't see no different people in my neighborhood, any strange faces or anything like that. And for the people, the way that they're robbing these houses, taking their sweet time, you know, they have to be comfortable in that area, knowing that if somebody sees them, they will just say, hey, cool, you know what I mean, because they're in the area. So that's my point for tonight.
Thanks, Ms. Hollis. And if I may address the issues first. I would like to start off or talk about the police. Last time I checked, I think Bermuda has one of the largest police forces per capita in the world. So I always have the issue that we keep adding to the police force. And this last budget, the OBA has clearly added to the public safety budget, but they're taken away from our social services budget. I believe that prevention is right upon the cure. So if we put more money into our services that dealing and addressing our youth, we'll go a long way in dealing with a lot of the issues facing Bermuda. On the second point as to Belgrades and whatnot, as the former minister responsible for public works and the MP for the year, as you know, we have talked. We have had meetings before, and we have started neighborhood watch groups in the Pembroke area. I am an advocate that it takes a community to police our community, and somehow we have gotten this thing that it's the police's responsibility. If we all could start to address the neighborhood watching our particular areas, because in Pembroke, especially which borders mine and my colleague, Mr. Commissioner, we had started about 10 neighborhood watches over the last year, and I think one of the first ones there was you, Ms. Hollis. I think you and I talked a lot back then, you know, and pardon? Yeah, that's good. Agreed. And all I'm saying is that those are all things that come together as far as us policing the community. Now, when it comes to Belgrades, I remember us looking when we were the government to turn the old prison headquarters into a social club or a youth center or something. And we are right in the midst of addressing how we were going to address that when the election rolled around. So I don't know what the current government is doing, but we will continue to strive to address those issues that are facing us in our community.
strong neighborhood watch organization in the neighborhood of Constituency 21, just across the street. The boundary for our constituency is Happy Valley Road, and I'm on the southern side of the road, and Mr. Reese, he's the representative for the northern side of that stretch of Happy Valley. And you know, what we may be finding is, although the police are saying crime is down, of course it's not going to be uniformly down everywhere. You know, in this area, these areas in particular, we still may find it could be fairly high when it comes to issues like opportunistic crimes such as burglaries and the like. And I mean, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Hollis, and but I said, I'm pretty sure that me, my colleague Mr. Reese and I are going to put our heads together and see if we can you know, meet some of the objectives that you've outlined here tonight about what's happening at Dalvin's and the former personal officers' headquarters. Because, I mean, obviously you're of the opinion that the men that's being there, it's almost like an area where they're staking out, they can enjoy their time together and at the same time stake out the adjacent residences as well. Yeah, that's how I've been thinking about it, okay. All right, well, I appreciate that, and we'll get to you very soon.
If I can just add, because despite the fact that our constituencies 21, 16, and 15, we are pretty much, the three of us, the same part of the island. And one of the things that myself and MP Weeks were working on, even as government, was expansion of the CCTV network, which actually might be a tool to aid in surveillance without adding bodies to the police contingent. If we're not going to, you know, if we're going to focus on something, perhaps we can use technology as well to play a role. And that's something that we will continue to push for the government to continue to work, which was expanding the CCTV technology in key areas across the island, particularly areas of Pembroke and other areas that have a lot of activity that often is not socially helpful. And those are things that we will continue to sort of fight for, because if, as my colleague says, adding to a police force that's already per capita the largest in the world, will more bodies help? It's perhaps more better that we focus on how we see them deploy the bodies and using it with other resources that don't necessarily cost the country that much more money, but actually can add to a feeling of comfort of our citizens in these areas. So that CCTV component, we will continue to test.
And I just might add, I've often said, I think it was appropriated by Mr. Cannonier, because I remember before the election, in interviews I was saying that ultimately the best social services program is a economy that's on full steam ahead. You know, that the economy is growing and people can find work and jobs. We, just as maybe you might find that this area also has higher levels of crime, I'm pretty sure we'll also find that percentage-wise we probably have higher levels of unemployment as well. And so I believe that these challenges that are coming about will need to be addressed, but ultimately we need to kickstart this economy so that we can see our young men, who some of whom may have been out of work for a year or more, being able to get jobs and revive a beautiful economy. But of course we have to work on all levels to ensure that we see progress on all levels.
Take any other questions from the floor?
Yeah. Good evening, how is everyone? I guess I'll touch, if I can, good evening everyone. On the item we're talking about crime. I'm born and raised in the Pembroke area. And I often wonder if we're talking about how we're going to address things. I come from Kirby Avenue, and I'd just like to look at how much housing has been added, if you will, to accommodate the less fortunate. And where a lot of that housing has been put. It seems that we put less fortunate people with less fortunate people, and then we expect them to be more fortunate. I'm not certain how that actually is meant to help. And that's from the previous government, UUP, that continued under the PLP to do the same thing. So what I'd like to do in that area is what are we going to do to change that mindset? If you want to help someone, I think that you have to provide them the opportunity to see different surroundings in order for them to better themselves. So I'll leave that one. The other thing is that I see these forms. I'm noting that because of these wonderful technology that we have, I get all of these notifications from the PLP about things that you guys are doing now, which I think is awesome. what happened to that when you were in the government? You know, what happened with connecting to the people on a consistent basis so that people knew that they could rely upon their MPs at any given time. Again, I'm from Curtin, and I'll go back way back. When Dr. Barbara Ball was the MP for that area, I remember her walking around the area all the time. I live in Smiths now, but I'll tell you what, the representative that was running for the PLP came around during election time. And I wonder, what are we going to do? And I'm hopeful that we continue to do these types of forums and not do it until we become, as we say, we're the government in waiting, and then when we become the government, we forget that we were waiting and we go back to the old. One more thing, social services. I know many people that may not agree. I think that the PLP, he put too much effort in social services and not enough effort into encouraging people to want to do better. We like to give handouts and not an opportunity to tell people what are we going to do to give them a handout, what are we going to do to help them to better themselves, if you will, right? And that's something that, again, that I would like to see. I've been home 4.5 years, and I've been mentoring a lot of our young people, and I'll tell you what, I don't know what's the thickness of the walls here, but a lot of them's heads are a lot thicker than this wall. And so you know, it's very difficult. But they're smart enough to know that, hey, I ain't going to get some help from the government. And so they're quite easily and quite willing to do that. So I'm not saying that, you know, what the OBA is doing in cutting services, because the last point that I'd like to make is about, if we're talking about cuts, you know, I'm a business-minded person. It's real simple. We always look at our expenses, and if we want to look at what our expenses are, we need something to cover that, and it's called revenues. So if we do not have the revenues, right, what are we meant to do? There's a few options that I think. We can go out there and get an income tax if you want. But right now, because of where Bermuda is, I think it is necessary that there has to be some cuts in some areas. I'm not no expert in saying where those cuts need to happen, but they certainly need to happen. So that's just my little 4 points, and I'll let somebody respond to that. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll start with some of my other colleagues, like Mr. Burke and even my other colleagues. Touch on Mr. David Burke, Mr. Paul. Yeah, I'm Mr. Rivera, Mr. Paul.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
I just like to say, Mr. Paul, I commend you for the work I know you were doing when you were a manager of a certain institution with trying to mentor young men. My nephew was a product of some of that. And persons like yourself need to continue that work, particularly now when many of our young men don't have avenues of opportunity as easily accessible to even get these sort of basic work skills. That's why we champion programs, and even this was a government program, was about a program to empower, with the Job Corps program, which we've heard, and Mr. Commissioner can talk more about that, that they're going to cut it. We had heard they are scrapping it. Now, Mr. Dunkley, who's not actually necessarily the minister responsible for it, has said that it's not going, but we'll see, because that was a program that Mr. Weeks had helped to orchestrate, and Mr. Commissioner will probably speak more on that empowerment side, that we thought would help our young men, not as a crutch program, but as a program to give them the skills to get out there and make them marketable, so they can get out and do, as you say, get out there and work for themselves, not so much to keep them as a ward of the state. Because we understand that that was important as getting people back to work, particularly our young people who may not have had the same ethic driven in them early like we did. So we understand that, and that's a shift. So we understand some of the messages that came to us on the 17th. And part of that was not only that perhaps we need to help our people more, but we need to help them in the right way. And some of the ways we thought we were helping them, we didn't help them that much. So we understand that. So we're going to deal with that, and we're going to continue to champion ways that are going to get people working, get our young people in the right place, and even when it comes to the economy, and I will talk about that. I'll let Mr. Burke, who's our shadow finance person, talk more about the revenue components that you talked about, because, you know, we understood how it works. and we needed more revenue. That's what was happening over the years from 2005, 2008, revenues were dropping. But Mr. Burke can tell you more about some of the things that we feel will help get the country back on track when it comes to revenue. But we understand that part of the effort that we as a government in waiting and as a future government will have to deal with is how do we remove perhaps a concept that the government is a crutch, that the government is there to facilitate and empower and make sure the environment is full of opportunity. It's not the government that's the opportunity, but we help facilitate the opportunity in the environment that people can embrace.
Good evening, Mr. Holt. Like you, I too have been raised in and around that area, but I want to clarify that the social services program under the former government, PRP, was not necessarily one of handouts, because our social services program, be it financial assistance, child and family services, had a lot of stringent guidelines as to the ability to get that assistance. And I know there are always people that get through the cracks and abuse the system. But for the most part, the social service, as we had it orchestrated, was just a stopgap measure, which was very closely linked to labor and training, and hopefully if things have worked out, I think this commissioner will talk more about it. The workforce development program and the job corps was all linked to the government assisting those that fell in hard times, but also challenge them to set up their own situations so that they would be on the social assistance for a short term rather than a long term basis.
Mr. Paul, thank you for your comments, because one of the comments I think is very important, because it's a struggle. It's a struggle between, I guess you could say, where do you draw the line between assistance which is required for people that are struggling, and then where does the line get drawn between when it comes to dependence? The one thing I would say is the easiest way for the government not to be a crutch is for the government not to be a crutch, and that's a part of the community involvement itself. So what we have to look at is how do we make sure that we are empowering people. Now, I would have this question all the time on the doorsteps when I was canvassing, because there would be comments insofar as financial assistance, there's people abusing the system, but then I'd also have people inside of my constituency, people who worked for 25 years, had a steady job, displaced because of the transformation of our economy. May have an associate's degree, 52-year-old female, perfect record, etc., but cannot get back into work and has been looking for 2 years. But because the jobs are not there, because the type of her jobs that were there have by and large been outsourced, and there's definitely a challenge. So from our perspective, we need to make sure that we provide the retooling and retraining for that type of thing to happen. That is the most important thing to make sure that we take care of our economy. And so from a social services perspective, I think that I think that financial assistance sometimes get a bad rap, because most people that are on financial assistance don't necessarily want to be on financial assistance. And we have to make sure that we provide people the way of getting off financial assistance, which is a lot nowadays, a lot more complex, because there's a lot more trouble when it comes to so far as finding a job. Insofar as the overall budget picture, one of the things I think is important is that we cannot focus on cuts. Cuts are not going to solve our problem. And one of the reasons why the Progressive Labor Party is not government right now is because we tried to put through a whole lot of cuts during our time. And those cuts affected our people at a time when they can least afford it. And I think that that's something that we have to remember. From a budget perspective, what is most important to do, I think, is to focus on efficiency in the economy, and it's also to focus on revenue. And revenue means growing the economy, and one of the things of which the leader spoke about in his throne speech reply, and I spoke about as well in the budget reply, is we have to diversify the real economy. And I think that much is key. We cannot keep on doing the same things that we did in the 80s and 90s and expect them to work in 2000 this time and going forward. So I think that's a challenge. But one of the other things which we really, really need to focus on is healthcare costs. One of the last things we did in the budget session on Monday night, while we were there until 5:30 a.m., is we passed increases to health fees. and the health fees are going up in some cases 15, 20, 25% year over year. People can't afford that. That is money that everyone has to pay, every employer has to pay, every person who's employed has to pay. And it begs the question as to what is the government going to do about healthcare costs. Now, I can be the devil's advocate, and I can say the OBA have vested interest in making sure that some parts of the healthcare system stay the way it does. That may be the case, but all of us need to make sure, and I know from our side, we are going to push the government on continuing the work that we started, which is with the National Health Plan. Healthcare costs continue to increase, and until we can have a better healthcare system that has better outcomes for our people and also embraces not only traditional medicine, but also alternative medicines and other forms of medicine that people may want to have and not force them into one healthcare system, we might have better outcomes for our people and also have a lower cost. So we have to grow our revenues. Our choice, our thought before the election was to try to keep spending level and focus on growing the revenue. And I think that's the way that we need to go at. There's only so many cuts that you can do. If you're talking about cutting the budget, as was said by the Minister of Finance and as was said by the former Premier, we can balance the budget tomorrow. It will just mean laying off 1,500 people. And when you have a recession, you can't lay off 1,500 people because that only makes your economy a lot worse. So I thank you for your points. I thank you for your comments because I think they're very helpful. And what we must do is I think it's important to make sure that we do not stigmatize everyone who may be on social services because there's a lot of people who don't want to be there. And we have to make sure that those who are abusing the system get out of that abuse. And I think that much is a key point that we have to focus on and making sure we continue to help those that need the help during this tough period.
Good evening, everybody. My name is David Peck. You mentioned diversifying the economy. I attended the budget speech in the House, and I went to the budget breakfast down at Hamilton Princess because I wanted to get an idea of what this government was going to be doing coming out of the gates with regards to the economy and the people of Bermuda. Now, I was off the island for a number of years when I came back, but what I have noticed is that as the economy's been shrinking, so the government of the day was picking up slack with regards to a lot of supporting and providing incomes for a lot of Bermudians who are otherwise wouldn't have. What we haven't done is we haven't diversified our economy. And I literally heard Bob Richards say, and that's fine, because that's what we do best is in financial services, the budget breakfast. It's not fine. We're never going to be in the insurance sector country that we were in the 1980s and 90s. The world's changed. Corporate governance globally has come to play such that countries are repatriating to the US and UK from Bermuda. We have them saying, oh, insurance-linked securities are going to drive income for us. We're going to push investment management in the budget breakfast. Carry laws are going to come out sooner or later, and that's going to take care of that too. We've got FATCA, as far as individuals having to pay their taxes to the US and not hiring in Bermuda. I mean, we all saw the US election recently. All of these things are going to influence the insurance sector getting smaller in Bermuda over time. It's growing globally. It's getting smaller in Bermuda. That's a lot of the reason why. Another reason why, a major one for us, is that our labor costs are higher than other places. And so we're now seeing our business services, where a lot of our Bermudians are sitting in business services and insurance, is being moved to other jurisdictions, which means that we're now left with a headquarters, a group of underwriters who tend to be skills that we don't generally have in Bermuda. I mean, there's only so many actuaries that the Bermuda Society is going to produce. We've got to find a way to diversify our economy. Now, I was recently on the government website and I noticed that Dr. Gibbons is, for some reason, he's got absolute responsibility for every bit of the sector that we can grow to get foreign investment on the island. You know, he's got telecoms, which is, we're on the telecoms backbone of the Atlantic Ocean here. all the fiber optic cables that pretty much go across the Atlantic come through us. That's foreign money we can be getting in. There's satellite paths that go over the top of us. That's money we can be growing. So telecoms is huge for growth for us as a sector. We have more people in Bermuda who do telecoms that can do actual underwriting and insurance. We have this technology, this apps development. There's very little apps development going on this island. I guess.
Can you just, for the help of the benefit of the audience, just explain, what do you mean by, what does that signify? Apps, you said?
Yeah, so everybody's got a phone, right? They all got their little apps on the phone.
Apps.
Yeah. People are making money on this stuff worldwide, and there's royalties associated with this, licensing associated with it. I mean, you may be getting it for free, giving it away for free, but you're getting advertising money from it, from iTunes or BlackBerry or whoever's downloading it. Royalty money is anything that comes through those optic cables to us for money. That's money coming into our pockets. Apps, technology, entertainment royalties. I mean, Bermuda's a beautiful place to be pushing for an entertainment center. Growing our entertainment industry here. You mentioned health tourism. I mean, all these areas that Mr. Famous and I have kindly had a little interlude about that recently on Facebook. But the fact of the matter is that there's growth in all these areas, and I don't see us pushing it. And what really worries me is people who don't necessarily have a vested interest in growing anything but the insurance sector and the finance sector and in charge of it. So I'm asking you, as the opposition, to push it to grow these parts, these different sectors of the economy. Because without growing those sectors, without growing those opportunities, we can train our people in whatever way we want to. The jobs won't be there unless there's a way for us to actually turn some money.
I'll just touch on, Mr. Ted, you raised a lot of very good issues, and I can tell you, perhaps it was our fault. We didn't communicate the vision that we had around this, and we were already there as a government, but I'm not trying to go back and make any excuses for what we didn't do right. But I can tell you that the Honorable Opposition Leader who sits there, I'm not asking him to say anything because he doesn't need to talk. He, as the minister responsible for that area of telecommunications, was right in the belly of this diversification movement that we as a government were trying to push. Satellite, space enterprise zone down at Southside, taking advantage of our satellite rights for the spots that we have, talking with the major satellite players in the world to get them to invest in Bermuda, even looking at some of the new next generation space operators. Because one thing is that NASA, who is the big American government player, has been directed to actually privatize and commercialize segments of the space industry. So that's why there is a huge opportunity for Bermuda as a hub for the space industry here. And that was just one area that we were working in. And I said, it's our fault that we didn't communicate that better to the public, that we had a vision, as well as other areas. The blue economy as well, another area that we have a clear determination around. And again, the former Minister for the Environment was in that space, and it was in our platform. And frankly, he's the main preacher on the island for that. I'm not even going to get into that yet, but I'm sure Mr. Burke can touch on it as you know, for our spokesman in that area. There are a number of things that we were looking at, as well as you know that we were over in the Middle East looking at how we can diversify our financial services as well. Mr. Burke will talk more about that. There are a number of things that we had on the table. We didn't communicate them as best as we should to the country who saw our vision of diversification and how it would help our people. But we were also concerned about not just the areas that were going to put certain very highly educated people and fill their pockets, give them jobs, we were obviously working in the tourism space, and some of the green shoots, I'll call them that you've recently seen appear, was the work of the party to continue to push for further development in the hospitality industry. With the green, starting with the green fund, Hampton Princess, they've now bought the area in Southampton. These are things that we were actively working on. And if we had communicated them better, things might be different as to what we have. So we understood that. And that remains something that the PLP is going to challenge. And I'm going to stop there and let our economics person talk more about what we see.
I just want to mention one thing. Actually, with the environment and a number of these areas for diversification, I think it's the government themselves that said they're carrying on the work that the PLP put forward. And recently, I think it was just this week that they mentioned with regards to what the environment. It's actually talking about what the PLP did in taking that forward. Well, taking that forward, championing it, we need to put the hammer down on this because that's the only way thing that's going to bring this economy around. Focusing on financial services is not enough.
Oh, Mr. Petty, thank you for your comments. And one thing I'll say is I'll be brief because as MP Rodan said, the leader spoke on this extensively during his throne speech reply, and I also spoke about it, that we need economic diversification. And the places in which you spoke, whether it's telecoms, whether it be IT, whether it be exploring the blue economy, or whether it be the green economy, which is something I spoke at length about, which I think is something that's very important. You spoke about the cost of doing business here, and that's the challenge. The cost of doing business is because of the cost of living. I hear the government talk about, there's too much affordable housing. Well, I know a lot of people my age that still can't afford to buy a house. And those are the facts. So when we hear people talk about there's too much affordable housing, I'm sorry, I do not necessarily agree with that. Is the housing market, is there a challenge in the housing market? Yes, there is no question a challenge in the housing market. The fact of the matter is that there was a very large housing bubble that because of the size of our country, we cannot be like the United States and spend the money to allow that housing bubble to pop the way it needs to. So we're definitely going to have some problems and adjustment there. But when it comes back to the fact of the expense of doing business in Bermuda and the expense for everyone and everyday people, I think we need to focus on energy costs, which are one of the main drivers of expenses here in Bermuda, and that means that we need to be aggressive and use this opportunity to reduce our energy consumption, not only our energy consumption, but also to promote alternative energy. It comes back to healthcare, which I was speaking about, which every employer has to pay, and changing how the healthcare system may work in this country. And we need to be more productive as citizens. In a global economy, of course, we are competing against everyone in the world. And we need to make sure that message is loud and clear to all of our citizens. We have to be more productive. That means that as the government is challenged to do more with less, we as people need to do more with less. And that means that, I don't necessarily want to say it means working longer hours, but it means producing more during the hours in which you work. Economic growth comes from productivity growth, and whether that means we're going to reduce our energy costs, whether that means that we're going to save more, or whether or not that means that we're going to produce more while we're working, that will lead the economy to grow. So it's about diversification and it's about productivity, and I think that we all can be involved in that process. Speaking just to what the current government is doing, it's good that they may give credit to what the Progressive Labour Party was doing before, but that's not what we hear. What we hear is 14 years this, 14 years that, we're going to clean up your mess, leave us alone, let us get on with it, you don't know what the hell you were doing. That's the type of stuff that we hear coming from this government. It's contemptuous, sitting in the House of Assembly, it borders on rude and a level of immaturity, and that's the type of stuff, but it's okay. And what I tell them is that you're not going to be able to win the next election on 14 years, so you better get on with the people's business. And that's what we will be doing as the opposition, to make sure that we remind this government what they have to do and the type of things that they have to take care of. So I thank you for your comments. They're not lost on the Progressive Labour Party. Believe it, because we are the party that believes that we have to diversify. Build on our financial services industry, yes, but diversify the economy so it works for more people.
I just want to add, I think Mr. Petty is really onto something. At the era whereby we can see continual growth in the insurance sector, the way we've seen it, bricks and mortar being established, I think, is largely a thing of the past. I have some comments in the newspaper earlier where I talked about the role that, I'm glad Mr. Tannick's here, he may be able to speak to us a little later on this, the role that these exotic vehicles such as sidecars, these exotic investment vehicles, sidecars, investment-linked securities, these types of things are precluding the need for hedge funds and other big funds to establish bricks and mortar presence in places like Bermuda now. And then when you talk about the overall cost of living, outsourcing, the other thing that I think has been very prevalent in terms of development in the last 15, 20 years has been the ongoing role of disintermediation. What I mean, the role that technology has played, the advances in technology has played in eliminating what heretofore would have been many lower and mid-level positions within the corporate world. And so that is continuing on and on as well. So we need innovative thinking now. We need to think outside the box. But I think one of the challenges we have is we have a government that has been put into power, but whose support base really represents the old vested interest of Bermuda, who did fantastically well over the last 25 years, and did particularly well under the first 8 or 9 years of the same PLP government that they now vilify. And so we need to begin to reposition our economy. With respect to training, my vision was that, you know, it's times like this where you take the opportunity to begin to retrain your people. Now, granted, you know, there's not much now that you can train them for, but I still believe that with respect to training, there's great utility in repositioning our education and training systems in a way that begins to produce what I call workers who are proficient in science, technology, engineering, and math, what I call STEM workers. That has its own value in and of itself. So if we're producing more and more of these types of workers who are competent in these core competencies, I believe that Bermuda's competitiveness can be sustained in the 21st century, no matter what industries or the level of diversification that we embark upon in our economy. Very quickly, the blue economy, for example, when we think of the blue economy, we're talking about economic activity that is focused around our marine environment. And in many cases, people think of things such as fish farming, which is obviously a component of it. But you know, we have people like Dr. David Saul, who's been telling us for at least over a decade now that Bermuda has a significant amount of mineral resources within the 200-mile EEZ zone that the British allowed us to take possession of under the aegis of the United Nations. This is an exclusive economic zone that Bermuda has, despite being an overseas territory and not an independent country. The feeling now is, based upon exploratory moves that have taken place over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of research, that the potential numbers up in the billions of dollars for things like phosphates, iron, and other minerals that are likely to be found in our offshore waters. So what was going to require now is for us to be thinking less of what was, because not only Bermuda, I think to some degree in the U.S. and in the West in general, you have those who benefited from the types of economies that we had in that era, centered around banking and a free flow of credit, creating these bubbles that, you know, naturally they want to see a replication of that. But we can't have that, because all we're going to do in Bermuda is replicate the same problems that have brought us to this juncture right now. And so, Mr. Petty, I want to thank you for making this contribution tonight, because I think it has helped to stimulate the conversation.
I have 2 questions. The first one, if you talk to anyone in the financial sector who's honest, anyone who is really straightforward, and even outside of the financial sector in Bermuda, everyone recognizes that the model that Mr. Petty and all of yourself is gone for all intents and purposes. So why is that model still being pushed for Bermuda? That's always been a confusing, because anyone who's honest, who's in the industry, understands that we will never see that time again. So the fact that it's being pushed to the people of Bermuda seems somewhat irresponsible, quite frankly, in my opinion. And then secondarily, what, if any, concerns or comments you have on the newly impaneled SAGE Commission?
Sherry, let me start with your second question, and that's in regards to SAGE Commission. Every single member of the Progressive Labor Party on Tuesday morning, I don't want to call it Monday night, Tuesday morning voted against the SAGE Commission. And that's not because we do not believe in efficiency of government. That's because we do not believe that the government should outsource its responsibility to an unelected panel to decide what government services they're going to cut. That's it. And so that's our position. The fact is that they have gone ahead in that direction. That was one of their campaign promises. It was a lot of wasted time. It wasted whoever's time it was to write the 8-page bill in the Attorney General's chambers to draft the bill, which wasn't well written, and whatever time it's going to take. I mean, there's so many funny things in there. Here we have a government that talks about how they are not able to raise private funds for Job Corps, but make SAGE a charitable contribution, and then say that they have private funders who are going to dedicate money to the SAGE Commission so they can go ahead and hire consultants to find out what government services they should cut. Just speaking about it upsets me. Because the whole thing is like this, and we literally spent 3 hours of debate for this. It's not needed. The fact of the matter is that there are numerous resources, whether it be the Office of the Attorney General, Internal Audit, Management Services, even the Captain Office, the Civil Service Review. That's what it's about. So for what it is, it's a waste of time in some aspect. It's a waste of money in some aspect. Here we have something that's talking about reducing the size of government by creating another commission that is going to spend government money in order to accomplish something, whereas we've already done this research before. So it doesn't make sense. However, they're the government, they voted for it, they will have to own the recommendation of the SAGE Commission, and they will be the ones that will have to act upon it. My view is that it was a political exercise. They promoted it as a SAGE Commission, and they passed it so that they could go back to their people and say, we did it. That's not the hard work. The hard work is informing commission. The hard work is actually governing and getting on with what you need to do. So we'll see what happens from that. But I mean, we're not convinced, and every single member of this party voted against it, and I'm proud of that because we put up a very spirited debate for the people of Bermuda on Tuesday night because it was the wrong thing for this country. Now, going into why is the model continuing to be pushed for Bermuda? Here's one thing I will say is, yes, the model has changed, but that does not mean that there is not still growth and opportunity inside of the financial services sector. So I do believe that we will still continue to see a large amount of income, and we can also see some growth in the financial services sector.
When they say tomorrow, I wasn't saying that the financial sector is dead, certainly not. But as we do it, as it was in the 80s and 90s in terms of, as Mr. Miscount said, the bricks and mortar aspect, and you know, that's what I was speaking about, that particular model. Why is that? That appears to be what is being pushed.
Well, absolutely that appears what's being pushed, but there's for a reason. And the reason for that is political expediency. It's pure and simple. To say that at the point in time when you had not only a collapse, an almost near total collapse of the world's financial system, at the same point in time which affects our two industries in a great extent, financial services and tourism. If people don't have money, they're not going to travel. And if financial services is your largest foreign currency earner, it's certainly going to have a double impact on your economy. At the same point in time, we see companies which are beholden to shareholders would say, I need to reduce my expenses. I'm going to lay people off. I'm going to transfer responsibilities to other places. It makes a very big political argument that the Progressive Labor Party's policies were responsible for the changing of the global dynamics. But what I used to say when I was in the Senate, the opposition, now the government can blame everything on the sun was the Progressive Labor Party's fault. And the one thing I would say is, was the Progressive Labor Party responsible for the collapse of Wall Street? Was the Progressive Labor Party responsible for the housing crisis? What else is the Progressive Labor Party responsible for? The fact is that the model has changed, and that's why we were engaged in the work on diversifying the economy. But what we also need to recognize is there are opportunities inside of the insurance sector. There is diversification inside the insurance sector. You saw that this government, we went over to the Middle East. There is a lot of opportunity in trading, whether it's with the Middle East, whether it's Asia, and whether it's with Latin America, to continue to expand the services in which we offer, which can benefit a large variety of different markets, instead of just focusing on the US and Europe. So I think there's certainly growth there, but the model has changed. And the reason why no one is saying the model's changed, because it's a lot easier to say that term limits were responsible for companies outsourcing their jobs.
Yeah. And if I just add that, it's important to understand, there's also a lot of Bermudians who invest a lot of money in real estate. I'm not just talking about in terms of residential real estate, but also commercial real estate. Many of the buildings are empty. Many of the upmarket homes that were formerly being rented to many in that sector, some of them may be empty now, and so the only thing they can envision is to see another 3,000 foreign workers coming into the country, that real estate goes through the roof again, that we create another bubble in real estate. That's the model that they say has worked well for them, over the last 50 years, certainly worked well for them. So why wouldn't, in terms of risk fulfillment, considering where they're at right now in terms of their own financial status, why wouldn't they want to see that, even though it may be somewhat delusional, to take place again?
He's going for it. We'll put you back.
Anyway, excuse me, but I like...
Ladies first, ladies
Hold on, we're going to let you have a turn right after her, okay?
I do apologize.
Right after her, you can have a turn, okay? Thank you.
I'm all because basically some, that you guys have already touched on, and that's basically reducing the cost of living. I'm a strong proponent of it, not only for business, I'm talking about for residents. I've lost friends from both ends of the spectrum, and that also affects our quality of life as a Bermudian here. I've lost friends in 2006 because they were professionals coming back, got master's degrees and couldn't afford to live in Bermuda. So they were in UK. I have some other friends making big money here in Bermuda. That's the best on came for half the paycheck because they have a better quality of life. I think we're losing people from both ends, and we have to find a way that's sustainable for Bermuda. The way we're at right now is basically not sustainable, and I would really like to know what can really people do to help the PLP to get to a point where we really need to reduce cost of living.
I think what you raised on dealing with this issue, because that's one of the, how the country is going to deal with the cost of living is something that no one has yet found the solution to. We had a price commission whose findings were like developed, but people have talked about price control, but that's not the answer. Because, like you said, there are different parts of the spectrum that get impacted negatively with certain things to do. Now, as you said, there were people who were leaving Bermuda right during the time when the economy was expanding, and like presumably, unlike Bermudians, were benefiting. But like you said, they couldn't afford to be here, and perhaps the type of jobs that they were looking for weren't even available in the marketplace. But it was a hum, so they had to go. And I think recent stats have shown us that we had a huge brain drain of people, or a considerable brain drain of people, right when the economy was expanding. So going back to where we were from 1998 to 2008 or 7 is not the answer. Because that's not necessarily, that's going to push housing prices up, the price of rents up, scarcity of rents available. Do we want our people to be back where they were looking to the government to house them, which is what we were responding to? No. So we've got to find a different way to deal with this. Or one of the things which I know that we're more interested in than the current government is income empowerment of our people. What can we do to increase the incomes of Bermudians who are here now? Not import 10,000 people who might spend money here, who might rent houses, and to trickle down to the rest. That's not going to work, because that's already seen that it's not sustainable. So we've got to work on ways as a community, and certainly us as the opposition will continue to push on policies that will expand the income opportunities of Bermudians. Because that is really, and that can come from having a sustainable economic model. More diversification is key to that. And also training our people. And if I can, and those are the things that we have to focus on. How can we train our people for the economy of the future? And as Mr. Commissioner says, working in ways that, so that irrespective, having core learning and core training requirements, so that irrespective of where the economy is and the components that are there, people can move into the marketplace and have sustainable income.
one of the things that's always amazed me about Bermuda was that the way in which we really failed in the post-World War II era to ensure that the upper mobility amongst Bermudians themselves was going to keep pace with this radical, somewhat radical, I think that's a fair term, change that took place in our economy and our society, talking about in the late 80s, early 90s, which had tourism begin to decline, and you see the rise of international business. And you know, we have to admit, we singularly have failed in that. You know, we have Mr. Tannick and a few others who are born and bred sons of soil Bermudians who have done quite well in the insurance sector. But you would figure that after a quarter century of the growth of that sector, we would have seen more of our people, our Bermudians, playing more intrinsic and critical roles and substantive roles within that industry. So, I mean, but then when you talk about the question of immigration, for example, if you look at my mother's generation, who worked at Belco, she's here today, this very commission, and if you're talking about the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and how immigration was actually used as a tool to keep that generation of Bermudians down, to keep them from enjoying the phenomenal growth of the Bermudian economy that occurred in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now, despite that, many of them, our parents, did fairly well, despite those impediments. But still, we see that these policies, and somewhat infused by racial bigotry of that era, have still left us from Bermuda that sees a disproportionate burden of this high cost of living and these other negatives that we have talked about from this model of development falling disproportionately upon lower income and particularly black and brown Bermudians in this community. And that's the challenge that we're still confronting with 30, 40 years later. And you know, so even if we talk about diversification of the economy moving forward, we still need to ensure that core fundamental changes are afoot whereby Bermudians are going to be up front and center in terms of the developmental model. Lastly, I'll just say this here, the Progressive Labour Party, we should have been more vigorous in terms of the early years of our tenure in government, talking about that 98 to say 2003 and 4 period, and pushing more vigorously in this direction. We started to move a little late in that direction, but certainly I have no confidence that this present government is really prepared to move in this direction to the extent that it needs to.
Thank you.
Just 1 second.
So real quick, I just want to add a little bit on that. In answer to your direct question of what did we do with the high cost of living in Bermuda, I think what we touched on earlier of the blue economy, the green economy, once we diversify our economy, I feel we have more options, because right now having the main arm of the IB and the tourism sectors, and a lot of people being squeezed out of that. Now is the time to retrain and retool. So hopefully, as the economy picks back up, we have better trained people or more highly trained people to participate in our world economy.
Thank you very much for your question. One of the things is that cost of living is an incredibly vexing problem for Bermuda. And the reason that it's vexing Bermuda is because it affects everyone. And it affects everyone, and it's one of the most potent political tools. I remember back in the election campaign where we heard the One Bermuda Alliance said that they were going to reduce the cost of living, and within 3 months, they raised healthcare costs by 20% and it approved an energy increase that we were stopping. But that's besides the point, because we understand that there's a lot of people in the One Bermuda Alliance that have vested interests. But when it comes to a question of cost of living, we have to also understand why other economies have a better or more stable cost of living. And that largely comes to the fact, and it's a difficult subject to talk about, but it's because they have different taxes. They have different tax systems, and those who can afford to pay the lease, which actually gives them an ability to have a better cost of living. Housing in Bermuda is very expensive. Meanwhile, healthcare in Bermuda is very expensive. Meanwhile, all of our people are taxed at basically the same level. And Bermuda is one of the few countries that you are, the more money you make, the less taxes you pay. And that's the reality of the situation in which we face inside Bermuda. So during the throne speech reply and also during the budget reply, we spoke about the fact that we need to, in this time of transition, have those difficult discussions. And we need to talk about whether or not it's time for Bermuda to have monetary reform so that banks can, not have interest rates which may be set by a central body, which may, allow someone independent from the government to say, you know what, interest rates need to be a little bit lower to stimulate the economy. That's something that we need to look at. And we also need to to take a look at our tax system and whether or not there's changes that we can make that will benefit all sectors of our economy. Now, whenever you start talking about taxes, people get nervous, people start talking about income tax, people start talking about sales tax, etc. I don't care what tax we have, but I think what's important to realize is the tax system that we have in this country, which is by and large from the 1800s, needs to be examined, and we need to look at something that works better for all of our people. That's international business, and something that works better for local business. Because there's some people that you would find with international business, and without bringing up the dreaded word income tax, in some ways, that almost may work better for them. Because people could pay less taxes underneath these systems such as that. And there's always a question as to how it works. Because right now, we have this thing where we can't sign a double taxation agreement with another country because we don't technically charge taxes to our companies. So it's difficult to have a double taxation agreement. Now, I'm not proposing anything specifically off the cuff, because one of the things we spoke about is that you can't do that. That's reckless. You need to have a very in-depth discussion. But one of the things that we did not do in our time, we spent a lot of time, and it was a lot of criticism that we had. We spent a lot of time out UVPing the UVP. In 14 years, we by and large kept in place a system that had been in place for a very long time before. We lost the election partly because of that, and people were upset at us, not for some of the things we did, but for some of the things that we didn't do. So now is the time for us to make sure that we connect, for us to listen to the things of which the people want and put forward progressive items. Not being afraid insofar as who may upset, who may upset. We need to make sure we put forward policies that are going to help the broadest range of Bermudians so that we can all enjoy the Bermuda that we want to have.
Hold on.
Good. Now, I just wanted to take you, you people, a look back in history. Do you remember when they knocked on the Berlin Wall?
The Berlin Wall, yeah.
Yeah, the Berlin Wall. And what happened? Do you recall what happened? Today, they run the Euro. Germany is the place that, country that, so Bermuda has a wall. It's not, we do not have no financial problems here. I mean, as a country. The wall that we have is the judicial system. If you actually looked into the judicial system, nobody in this country is supposed to be fined $10,000 for traffic offenses. So you can look at the economics part of it. Who's going to pay? That guy must be selling drugs. If he paid. Well, that's what he done. He got to spend 200 days in jail. He probably had a job, and he would rather go 200 days in jail than to be fined $10,000. So it's the wall that we have. If you know what who's breaking down this wall, it's your children. Since they find out really real situation, because Mr. Petty, this gentleman, right? It should be about half more you people in this country. In this it should be half more. It should be like many blacks in here. It should be as many whites. Same here, right? Meaning that the wall has been broken down. Yeah, the only person. I mean, you can look at my eyes, see me like blue eyes. I come from. Yeah. The point I'm making is that in the inception of Bermuda, they first made roads and they had to police those roads. Right? Now it comes down to this theme of what they call racism. Mr. Commissioner speaks a lot of that, meaning that it's all start from the courts.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. The MPs, also, I would like to say thank you as well to Mr. Petty. I really enjoyed what you shared with us. I actually want to just go on the point of getting back, Bermudians getting back to work. And I just want to address it especially in one specific category, and that is the restaurant and hospitality industry. Like blue collars, landscapers, that particular type of industry. And I think I'm trying to bring some solutions as well. And I just want to share this. It's been said too long that Bermudians have been targeted as lazy, don't lack work ethic, can't make time and everything. But we can put everyone in the same boat, otherwise we can't make the same brush. I personally believe that many Bermudians would love to get back into the industry, but there's reasons why they can't get into the industry. They don't want to go back into the industry because the wages are where they are today. And I actually would like to bring forward some solutions going forward. Bermudians, like I said, they can't survive on this particular salaries. And one of my questions is, what would be a reasonable living salary for Bermudians? That's one of the questions.
You're talking about a minimum wage?
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying what would be a reasonable, if I want to work in that industry, what is going to be reasonable living salary for me to go back in?
Minimum wage, yeah.
Right.
Livable wage and
Minimum wage, yeah, okay.
Right, so that's what I'm talking about. That's one of my questions. And then what I'm looking at to also propose is to make up the difference with that where the salary is today, where these monies are leaving Bermuda, to where we need to get Bermudians back employed. And my whole thing is, I would also like some data on how much millions of dollars are leaving Bermuda in their particular industry, in their particular mainly hospitality industry. How much millions and millions of dollars are leaving Bermuda every year? That money does not ever come back to Bermuda. So that's one of my questions. And now I'm going to just go on to some of the solutions that I brought forward. Is we need to, as a country in total, and it's not just government, it's everyone that are here, that's especially making serious money. The insurance companies, because they do brag about the type of profits they make. The banks, matter of fact, last month, Bank of Butterfield talked about it made $27 million. And then 2 or 3 days later, they talked about that they had to cut 7 or 8 jobs. Yeah. I prefer if they had kept doing 7 or 8 Bermudians. And because I doubt very much that Bermudians were making $100,000, but let's say they were, then they could have bragged about, well, you know, we made $26,200,000, you know. But the banks, I'm talking about buy-in right now. The government, and etc. Telco, telecommunications that are just making money. And why I say governments, because I do have an issue, I think somebody touched on earlier in reference to the type of money that we put into financial assistance. And I would like to see probably some of them, all of financial assistance to assist Bermudians getting to work. So what I'm talking about, for example, let's say that in these particular industries, the wage is about $12 an hour. And let's say, because I don't have no stats, right? But let's say Bermudians, we want to work for, we can't afford to work for that 12, we will work for $20, $22. So these industries, these companies, these businesses that are making all this profit, reinvest some of their profits back into the economy. Why? Because there's millions of dollars that's going out of Bermuda that will never ever come back. If we employ Bermudians, these dollars circulate in Bermuda. How does that insurance company benefit with their investment? Because you're employed, they will now have Bermudians employed in these industries. There's Bermudians would have to be insured, number one. There's Bermudians will probably say, okay, I maybe now be able to afford a car. So that car would have to be insured. He had to go on it. The banks are the same way. Bermudians are hired now. They got savings account. They're going to run to the bank to get a loan for that car or whatever. So the banks are going to start to profit. The governments government's investment back into it will be, i.e. the payroll tax, so you name it. So-and-so is going to come up for government insurance, government financial assistance, because he's got a job, and government would now start to feel some type of relief in this particular area. Also telecommunications, whatever. But these are some solutions I'm trying to look at, whereas these millions and millions of dollars that's leaving Bermuda could stay in Bermuda, and the monies could generate and circulate in Bermuda by some of the institutions that's brags about the type of profits they're making to continue to reinvest in Bermuda. At the end of the day, Bermudians, we stay on the island, we invest into our own country through what I shared about earlier. One other thing that may have to be looked at, I definitely don't support a lot of these businesses that are making massive profit on the top at the expense of Bermudians. I don't support that. And we also do, especially Bermuda, where Bermuda made its name for itself, especially in area hospitality. When we had Bermudians in the industry and visitors came to Bermuda, and one of the things, Bermudians smiled, Bermudians had all the information, but the best places to go to, where to shop, where to do this, where to do that. So that friendly face in Bermuda is missing. And visitors, they tell me, especially sometimes, I talk to visitors all the time. What's happening in the industry is like a lot of non-Bermudians are in the industry, and they ask questions, and these non-Bermudians, they don't have the answers. So that's why one of the other reasons, the other benefits of getting Bermudians back into the industry. So I'm closing by saying, I'm not just going to sit back and complain, but I thought I'd just bring some solutions. And I feel that these solutions that I'm bringing forward, I hate to see them just sit on a shelf somewhere and collect some dust. But I think especially we really need to push some of these ideas.
Thank you very much. Before the members respond, I would encourage you to speak to our chairman of the party, Mr. Maynard Bill, in the back. He'll be able to take your information because we do have committees that work with members on the platform, and if you'd be interested in submitting those for that, I'm sure they'd appreciate that as well. Gentlemen.
Glenn, thank you very much for your thanks very much for your suggestions and recommendations. I think one of the most important things to do is to have those type of discussions and to generate ideas. And so I would encourage you to definitely speak to the chairman to get involved in putting together those committees. One of the things that also is helpful, I guess, on the local scale is we've spoken about immigration reform. And I think that immigration reform is important. You cannot immigrate to the United States. Just anyone, unskilled workers, etc., can't immigrate to the United States. It just doesn't work that way, and it doesn't work that way in many countries. But Bermuda, the only thing in which you need to do to get someone to come to Bermuda and to immigrate to Bermuda is to prove to the Department of Immigration that you can't find a Bermudian that will take your pittance of a wage, and then here, you can bring someone in. And that creates its own problem inside the economy. And I think what we must do is, and that's why we call for a rethink of the immigration policy, what we need to do is look at it from its very basics and restructure it for something that works better for all people involved. That means that companies who may need work permits, because we have to know that there are a lot of companies that do need work permits, cannot wait 6 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks for it, but can get them in a week or two, because that may be the case. We can structure a system that works better, but also what we have to do is that our economy needs to be more competitive. And we need to look at breaking down some of the barriers insofar as getting into business. I mean, we're still seeing, these huge rates that are still charged. We passed a motor car bill the other day. You want to start a lunch wagon, you pay $69,000. Lots of different things that cost a whole lot of money to start business. And in order to encourage entrepreneurship, we need to break down some of those long-standing barriers, which were put in place to prevent people from competing with other people. We need to get those things out of the way to make sure that there's a lot more competition to enable people to more easily enter business for themselves.
I just wanted to go back to the latest question about home. Piggybacks on what Mr. Parker just finished saying, the saying says it all the time, and I'm a firm believer, we have to support the people that support us. We have to find a way of educating ourselves and our children to the fact that we need to support each other. Because what I'm finding is that monopolies can take over. For instance, Elko is a monopoly, right? They go out and start a company. We call it the Ascent Company. What they do, they go out and start buying companies. So my specialty is air conditioning. They go out and buy air conditioning company that has to compete with my company that's 85% immediate. This other company's got maybe 10% immediate, right? And what happens is the fact that Alco could go into these companies and say, well, look, I need 10% of your electricity bill. That is how they're making this contract. What happens? My staff is getting out of work because we didn't get the work. Because a monopoly like Alco can afford to do it. Marketplace comes in and says, oh, that mom and pop starts making a lot of money. Here, come, take this here, get out of the way. We have to find a way to support people that support us.
My name is Mary Jean. I work at Vermont and Justice back on what Lynn said. I can tell you that Riverton basic wage is $7 an hour. Our rate is $7 an hour. But she depends on gratuity. And I'm hoping for more Floridians to come to the industry because it's money to be made. But one thing nowadays is that you take this tax.
It's the emphasized test.
Yes. And so many communities they're in this tax. Because some people are not used to computers. It has to be done by computer. Now everybody can apply is by computer. So I think a lot of people need to be trained on, especially I'll take this test. They say there's no failure, but people fail. And I just hope that, and we spoke to everybody on this test. I mean, former premier, immigration ministers, we told everybody about this test. But I just hope that we
I just want to say before you respond to that, it is my hope, because I used to work for Fairmont Southern as well, this test needs to go. And it is really hindering the hiring of Romanians. And I hope that is something that the party will consider looking at, because I've seen people with decades of experience in the industry can't pass this test. And it's junk science, it's a personality test, it's junk science. When I took it, I looked at it and asked what I thought they wanted me to answer. I didn't read the questions. I said, okay, this is the answer, this is the answer, this is the answer. Okay? They used me as a profile for CEOs for the test that they take, right? Because my answers were so good. But I'm not qualified to be a CEO to run a company, run things out here. This is some of the issues that we're dealing with today. So I put you on the spot, but yeah, I feel very passionate about this.
I'd like to say something about the test. And again, like my colleague, Mr. Ruban had said earlier about the former government, our government, was not being more forthright in what we were doing. One of the things that was on our agenda was to address the test that a lot of our people have taken in order to get into the hotel industry. I remember the minister sitting around the table talking about, why don't we take the test? I was one of those that took the test and somehow failed the aptitude. For some reason, so, but on a serious note, we were looking at addressing that test and seeing how we could either stop it or tailor it more to Bermudians so that we have a greater success.
Good evening, everyone. Three questions. The first one is the energy one. We are so wrong.
I'm right behind you, and I can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? I want to talk about the energy. We are surrounded by water. Why can't we use the water resources to convert a lot of the energy or things that we do? I have a young friend that has worked in an area. She doesn't get paid, and she's a volunteer, and she's put a lot of good ideas into place. And she seems to have opposition with the person who's in charge of that industry, who wants to bring in more and more people. We have people here we are the best people to ask ourselves, why do we need so much outside influence to run our country? I have a problem with that. You know, we do need some expertise in certain areas, but people have been living here for decades around this place, and we can do something about it. And I think we can use the energy to assist all of us in bettering Bermuda in a lot of different ways. That's one. The second one is we have a lot of boats around on the island. Cars are taxed too high. My car is 8 years old. I have to pay more licensing fee, and I have a problem with that. These boats, these are luxury. They're privileges. Why aren't we taxing these people or doing something about that? That is income revenue to this country. They're bringing them all in. Some of these boats are $200,000. Why aren't you charging these people for polluting our waters? I have issues with that. Third one, immigration. I have the privilege of going to St. Paul's, and I heard Mr. Ravan speaking, with Mike Fay on some of the issues. He mentioned that there is a committee that's in place to look at all these applications for positions and things like that. I don't know when they put it in place, if it's something new, because I've had issues with them and how the hiring practices are with meetings and number of meetings. I've worked for a lot of exec companies, and I will tell you, a lot of these resumes and applications go in the trash can. They do not even get looked at. They already know who they're going to hire before they put that in the paper. There is no policing done in this country to follow up when they put an ad in the paper to say, how many Luminas did apply? Can I see the resumes? Can I see the application matters? They shred these things. I've seen it done. So that's one of the things that we need to be addressing in that area. Because from administrative assistants right on, people have to have master's degrees and bachelor's degrees for administration position. I don't think so. That's a serious thing to look at. Thank you.
I will touch on some of the issues. Now, when it comes to the issue of energy, I'm not talking about, you're talking about the energy industry in Bermuda. Well, we put forth a white paper on energy, which I certainly believe as a paper and as a document set a very good achievable path for our energy sustainability in the future over the next 10 to 20 years. The current government has said they're going to review it. That to me is language for shelf, to me. And let me just let you know, one of the things that was built into the paper, and the MP Burke can verify this, because he was spokesman for energy in the Senate, is that one of the things that we made sure that this energy paper talked about not only new technology in energy, but also the jobs that could be created. There are a number of different jobs. This is about the diversification that energy paper was seeking to push. People like people who would be installing new technology. And some of the things that we talked about was coming out of the paper, was working with like Bermuda College and with the National Training Board to set up the modules of which Bermudians who wanted new job opportunities could begin to train like now into getting involved with the energy industry. People who do the assessments for your house, who come to your house and assess your energy needs and make recommendations. We were busy talking to people about training our local people to do that. That's a whole new area of industry that would require technical training, and essentially someone could potentially start doing business too. There was about, and Mr. Burke, if you can verify, estimated about 200 to 300 potential jobs that we thought within the next 5 years could be created alone within the energy industry. And that didn't include some of the other larger things like transferring to LNG, which Belco could do, that would in itself diversify our energy needs as a country. So there are a number of job opportunities that if the government is prepared, and we were prepared to do, this was our plan, to implement the energy white paper, which would create greater energy sustainability, create potential entrepreneurships and opportunities, and retraining for people in the energy industry that would have created a considerable amount of jobs for our people. Not bringing in people to do it. That doesn't include the fact that there were things like potentially a wind farm, which could have been deposited off of the island at some point in the near future. And there are companies around the world who would be quite prepared to help facilitate that, not at the public expense either. This could be a private project. That in itself will create new jobs for people because the maintaining of that technology would take people. And it will be community people doing it. Numerous job opportunities and training that you could have brought in. But I fear that this government is not committed to that plan in any serious way at all. And Dr. Gibbons basically said they're going to review that. That is a shelf. That's putting on the shelf and not really pursuing some of the goals. Even from the standpoint of government, some of the goals in the paper were for government to begin to find efficiencies in itself, using some of our larger government buildings to install photovoltaic panels so that energy could be created, which could be sold back to Belco and government could earn revenue from it. These are things that could have been done and done right now, using Cedar Bridge and other large buildings that the government has on its property down in Southside. Areas where government could be earning revenue in the near future from a transfer and change in our energy platform. So those are some of the things that we will continue to fight for, but the new government clearly has its own agenda. You mentioned about cars. Now, I was the previous transportation minister, so I can tell you that some of the things that I was speaking to the former premier about is about how can we potentially create a graduated license fee so that as cars got older, people's license appreciated. So one, they pay less. Two, they be encouraged to keep their car because they get a benefit for keeping it. They will put more money into keeping it up rather than having to pay the same fee for the car that they bought that was $1,500 and the car is 10 years old and still paying $1,500. It could like graduate down or potentially more as their car got to maybe 1 year, 3 years, 7 years, 10 years, and you would pay a graduated lower fee so that communities would be paying less and would potentially keep their cars longer, thus less car in the market, less expense for everyone. So those are some of the things that we were looking at to actually lower the cost of you maintaining your car. The new government, whether they're going to do that, I have no idea. Okay, of course there's the immigration matter. Clearly been a hot topic for us over the last 10 weeks. And this government has made it very clear what their priorities are with immigration. I don't think anybody here needs to be told that. We have an immigration board which speaks to your question, which is supposed to be a part of the framework that keeps the system of when those permits come in and are properly reviewed so that if unions are available or if those applications are merit, then they will deal with them and also potentially send them back if there are people in the marketplace who can take those jobs. We now have a board that's less diversified in one, whereas we had trade unions and a mix of diversified people on the board prior. That doesn't exist now. It's pretty much a business-friendly board. Not only that, the same person who called us community and xenophobic sits on the board. So I think that we need to be concerned about whether that board will reflect any compassion for the community and interest when it comes to immigration issues. Just by virtue, empathy, or compassion, or whatever you want to call it. Right? Because you have a board that's stuck with people who are more interested in doing something else other than protecting our interests. So, the other point I want to make, which comes out of the budget around immigration. The government talked a lot about wanting to be tough on enforcement, changing policies to so-called favor Bermuda, but clearly their actions were in another direction. And when it came to the budget, that's certainly where they could have set their priorities and doing more to make communities more confident with immigration. But it went in their budget. Not only did they not put any money into compliance, which would have been the people going out there to police the environment, to stop people, particularly business people who are infringing the immigration policies, but they put no money into dealing with policies either, with the development of new policies. Or you might think, well, fine. Maybe they're going to train their people to be better at what the job they do and more like efficient. They cut their training budget by 77%. Not only that, there's clearly no intention of them on increasing their manpower in the department to even make the processing of immigration quicker. Because you can do only so much with technology. Ultimately, it is manpower. And we put a lot of investment into bettering the immigration process. A lot of money into bettering technology, bringing more manpower on board, and doing things that we felt would help, and even bringing down processing times down successively. We did all that. But at the same time, this government, who says it was all wrong for the past 14 years, they're not putting any investment in it at all. So I think around immigration, and I'm not trying to make you feel that like nothing is going to go right, this government doesn't seem to be putting anything in it. And it's really going to take the vigilance and some of the passion that Bermudians have shown around immigration issues over the last 10 weeks to make the government clear that we're not going to take some of the nonsense that they put out with clearly a preference for people who are here on a permit rather than creating a credible jobs plan that would help get us back to work, or changing policies that provide adequate protection for us in the workplace, or not so much protection, but fairness and treatment in the workplace. If they're not going to have that as a priority, then I think Bermudians need to know what they got to do about that. They've got to let the government know that they're not going to take it.
I tried.
There are a lot of
I see my people. I don't understand.
employment agencies around here. They're some of the biggest homes. I have had the privilege of camping in many places I've done now for myself. And when I was offered a full-time position and they wanted a Bermudian in that position, these agencies wouldn't even send them Bermudian applicants. They would send them all applicants. And these people who haven't landed on the island yet. So that's one of the biggest problems. There's the biggest
Absolutely, and there's a lot of companies that can exploit immigration rules. However, when it comes to immigration, I take a different view than my colleague. And my honest thought is that I think that it would be really hard for the One Bermuda Alliance to do a worse job at immigration than the Progressive Labor Party did. And that's the way I feel about it, because the problems of which Glenn Simmons are expressing, the problems that Glenn Simmons are expressing, the challenges that we hear time and time again about Bermudians being displaced in the workforce, not being able to happen, that didn't happen under the One Bermuda Alliance. That happened under the PLP. And we need to understand and recognize that part of the reason for our loss on December 17th was because we did not address that issue effectively enough. So I just have to take a different view. And the reason I take a different view is I will never forget the very first time I went to Alaska Hall in 2004. It was my first statement because I just come back to Bermuda. I lived away since basically 1990. I just come back and I was frustrated. I was fortunate to get a job, but I was frustrated with the way the immigration system was then, where it was the employee's responsibility to prove that a company was following the law. I don't think that it worked. I don't think that and I do not want to criticize people on the immigration board at the time, but I don't think that they did a good enough job. And that's why I believe that we need to have immigration reform. Immigration reform that recognizes that we need foreigners here, but immigration reform that says there aren't just 10 closed categories. There's about 50 closed categories. And if you don't close the categories, then it's kind of like, no, you can't bring in Mason after Mason after Mason, Tyler after Tyler after Tyler. No, you can't do it. There is a certain level and a limit to that. And it's a very difficult and complex problem. But I believe that we need to be honest with ourselves and say that we could have done a better job, and to use our experiences where we failed to make sure that this government does a better job. And if they don't, be ready to do a better job when we get back in 5 years or 5 months.
So we got time for 2 more, okay?
What DC was saying, the work term limit policy, we went on the Hill, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and had made some requests. And I was wondering if anybody in the opposition has heard as to whether or not the government was going to make any changes to that.
I think we've not, the government has clearly not taken notice of the passion and feelings of the country around that issue. And let's make it clear that our position is that it was a policy that the government could change if they wanted, but they made a promise to the public that they would suspend and review. And clearly, as they expressed it, take time to review and come up with solutions that would perhaps would end with the elimination of the policy altogether, but make changes to the immigration framework and work permit policy and reform, presumably, that would make people feel confident that what was going to come after would provide the adequate processes and like protections and make communities feel confident that that the immigration policy was working. Now, just to go back to my honorable friend, I wasn't trying to defend the PLP record. We did some things very wrong with immigration, despite our best efforts, and we didn't have the confidence of the people in carrying it out. So I know that, and we need to go, when we go back to government, be better and understanding what your interest is when it comes to immigration. But this government has not kept its promise, and it has taken steps, as we've all noticed, that seem to have been in favor of the permit holders. And so, despite the gathering at the House, despite the clear articulation of people's displeasure with their changes and how they've done them at the meeting at the AME Hall, they've not done anything. They seem to have decided that all they need to do is to continue on the path that they've set and made certain changes, even frankly proposing that non-Bermudian children should have free work rights in Bermuda, although they have since withdrawn it. But the fact that they even came up with that proposal, to me, shows you where their minds are at and where their interest is at. So, no, they haven't responded to what have been the concerns of the general population at all, in my view. But that's where we have to continue the work that we're doing. And we're going to make sure that we're a voice around the issue, because if anything, we must get the government to make changes to the work permit framework that we were not successful at doing. But we should push them to make sure that they make changes that make Bermudians feel that they are being treated fairly in the workplace. But I will go back to the budget again. If this year's budget is a sort of picture of what their priorities are, it's not to do that. They're not putting money into compliance for more people to be policing the immigration framework. They're not putting money into training their staff to be better at the work they do. They're not putting any money into hiring more people who can do work better, quicker, faster, and abler to make sure that the immigration framework, and they're not putting even any money into policy so as they continue to develop policy. So in my humble view, and the view that we have expressed, it's going to be status quo. But it's for us as Bermudians to monitor and to make it clear to the government that we're not going to be happy with the status quo.
Can I just, very quickly, I just want to say this, that certainly we didn't create this monster, but I'm with David. We didn't do enough to really begin to change, the direction of this ship. I believe that the lack of having real balance between labor on the one hand and capital on the other, where you have the pendulum swinging too far in favor of labor, has created some real significant imbalances in our economy and in our society. I believe also a byproduct of this has been to see the wage stagnation, particularly at the lower to mid levels, that has particularly affected Bermudians in terms of the type of wages that they get at a time when the cost of living was continuing to increase, that they could expect within certain job categories. And I believe that this has had a major impact on Bermuda that we're still reaping the consequences of. And so we need to really, I think, create a better balance here. I'm not as confident that the current government is going to do it. We know whose interests they represent, and I don't think we're going to see that change anytime soon. But certainly on our side, and it's our side in opposition, we need to keep them on notice that we are going to be policing them in ways that we haven't seen in Bermuda for some time on this issue.
Thank you.
After what Mr. Burke said, that's why that's it. What I was going to mention, that it seemed like, well, I won't say that, I don't know anybody's feel, it seemed like we just probably do this, that one problem. But anyhow, as long as we retaliate and come out of school and help people in the PRP to get us back on track. But the other thing I today was speaking about, not building age, but employment age. When I was at Delco, they wanted foreigners. There was one foreign lady that had a school, and you had to go to that school. There's all the big companies around pay her. She was, I mean, I'm sure she must be a multimillionaire now. They paid her to teach that, and they told us straight, do not join the union. One thing, now you're unbeliever and all these places are labor. And then what people you have to, or people labor. Everybody's labor. When they got here, they told us straight, that's one thing you can't do. You can't join no political party. You have to join the UDP party. Because you don't do labor here. You do labor, you have to go back. I went to NBA a few years ago. This girl that served me, she's yet to speak English. So I said to her, excuse me, where are you from? She said, I'm from Russia. I said, where? She said, well, I said, how long does it take to get here? She said, well, because you know, it's really a week prior to get here. I'm sure they wanted it by the cheapest labor, because they're putting the cheapest labor. And that's what I spent South Beach, and about probably a year and a half. She was in the main dining room. That's awesome.
And in 7 years, she'll be elected to Parliament for the ODA.
I have a little joke with this, when I was one of the founders of the Progressive Group. Because when that went down, we were thinking of, you know, everything else except the right thing, I think, no. Because we all had our own theater, we had our own little stores, all little stores, old country stores. You go in and take your little book and they write down the half spot and blah, and a thing like that, and you went home. And sadly, my oldest son, Dennis can come and said, and that's how it went. And now when the big stores come in there, I mean, you go to Marketplace every week, you go there, I go there every Wednesday, just for 5%. And it don't work. It's already cheap, the price is like that.
That's right.
First in the model. And they're changing all their prices. They're just to get 15%. But yeah, and we're sort of just for like doing this to ourselves.
Thank you.
And I'm sure everybody here knows what the Progressive Group was. Led to the organized the theater and the architects of the theater boycott, which essentially ended public discrimination along racial lines. So put it in context in case some people are aware of that.
Thank you. Mr. Tanner?
No, I was surprised that we got here someone fought here, so.
Oh. This is it, you beat all kinds of the PLP.
Yeah, I just had a few comments. Specifically with respect to, what are you guys doing specifically with respect to work permit policies? Because there's been a lot of platitudes, but I haven't heard any specifics in terms of what you're going to do differently to make sure that the rights of median workers are protected. And Minister Roubain, former Minister Roubain, I gave you some specifics in terms of suggestions, and I haven't heard them expressed in the House of Parliament in terms of specifics, in terms of leveling the playing field and making sure that we're not discriminated against around the country. So, to me, it's been 10 weeks, I don't know how long it's been since the March in Parliament, but bottom line is that we've had enough time to really formulate specifics in terms of how we plan to make sure that Bermudians' rights are protected in our country. And I haven't heard anything other than platitudes. So, pardon me? No, he can share it with you. Yeah.
Very cool.
No, the thing is,
I am quite happy to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
If you wish, Mr. Chairman.
So I would love for you to speak, because I think they're good suggestions. And, you know, the thing is, if people are going to put forth suggestions that are going to make things better, we want to make sure that they reach the appropriate audience.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I tabled a motion in the House of Assembly, of which is coming. We would have debated it already, but the budget and the time of the budget sort of had that pushed back. And some of the suggestions that Mr. Tannick passed on to me, I actually were going to include as part of the solutions that we would be outlining in my presentation. And I'm happy to share some of them with now. Some of them was to ensure that as we frame policy going forward, we recognize that we're in a global village and we have to have an effective balance between protecting Bermuda's interests of its workers, but also ensuring that we are competitive. Some of the things that were mentioned that I was going to touch on in this debate was recommendations like ensuring that we did, at the same time, ensuring that we have policies that do attract high net worth individuals to Bermuda who can actually create Bermudian jobs. And some of this is like, for instance, the C-suite. There's a term called C-suite. And these are the people who are at the highest level of most companies, if you're talking about attracting international companies. And I'm not going to give everything now because I was trying to save it for my debate, and I'm happy to, and I was going to use some of what Mr. Tannick shared with me in that debate, but that's just one of the things that they talked about, ensuring that this particular band of individuals, who actually are those who usually bring the companies here, that invest and ensure that, and we would have a better understanding of their needs as employers, and we could ensure that one that our locals were appropriately employed in these companies, but also we would allow these employers to actually be here and give them, as long as they were employing Bermudians, very much in line with the legislation that we created. Essentially for job makers legislation, which that's what. If you wish to share more about it,
that was one of my suggestions. My suggestion was very simple. One of my frustrations is that every night, 4 or 5 years ago, when I drive home, and I live in Southampton, I'll go across that site, across from the gas station, and I would see people working 24/7. And I work some crazy hours, okay? For those of you who don't know, I'm actually the president of Excel. Sometimes I'll be knocking off at 11 o'clock at night, sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning. And I see people on that site, across from where Herman's is, or whatever it's called now. And they didn't look like you guys, okay? Now, let me say this, that the proposal that I put forward was that there should be some limitations on the amount of hours that these guys can work when they come to our country. Because we get discriminated against, because we get described as being lazy, because we have families to go home to, and we can only work maybe 10 hours a night, or 10 hours during the day. But these guys come here, and they can work 24 hours a day, and they get labeled as being, showing incentive, and showing, you know, being willing to sacrifice. So the proposal I put forward was very simple. A lot of the business models that are out there right now are based on a 24/7 work hour, where you have to work so that you can come within the time frames and the economics set by the banks. What I'm suggesting is that on a go-forward basis, maybe we look at limiting the amount of hours that some of these people who are here competing for our jobs can actually work, so we can effectively compete. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. But those are just some of the things that we put forward. So in terms of specifics, right, because one of the things I hate is platitudes. I can't stand platitudes. We're going to do this and do that. How are you going to do it? And when are you going to do it? And what is your time frame for execution? So to me, we've had 10 weeks since this thing came up about term limits. And to me, a work permit is a term limit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because it's for a finite period of time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And so to me, the strategy that we should be employing as a party is very simple. Okay? To me, it's very simple. We need to say, hey, look, as a party, we're taking credit for the work permit policies that we put in place, and we're going to make sure that we enforce them and hold the OBA accountable.
Amen.
And really come up with some specifics, because as I look around this room, I don't see anybody here under 35 years old. You know, what's our strategy for track? I'm sorry.
There's a couple of people here under 35.
I'm not talking about chronologically. I'm not talking about chronologically. He has the mental attitude of somebody who's like probably 50. He's take that back.
Platitudes.
Take that back. But no, I want to hear about, you know, how are we going to attract that under 35 demographic? And I think, you know, I commend Mr. Burke for his honesty in terms of that we had some issues and we had some things that we needed to look at, and we need to really educate our people. Educate our people about buying stocks in some of these companies. Yes. You know, alternative forms of revenue. We're not doing that. You know, I think we're doing it in fits and spurts, but we really got to be honest with our people. We're living in a global village, people.
Yeah.
Okay? We're part of the global economy. Whether we like it or not, that's the deal. Okay? The world is flat. There's other jurisdictions that do things a lot more effectively than we do. And right now, we're in a race for survival. Yes. I'm going to tell you, the old times are not coming back. They are not coming back. And the sooner we realize that, we're going to be better off. So to me, it's like, you know, how do we navigate our way through that? You know, this gentleman talked about ILS, and he talked about the insurance industry, this, and insurance industry, and I get that. We do have to look for alternative revenue streams. But, you know, all companies are not the same. You know, there are some companies that are doing the right thing. So, you know, let's not paint everybody with the same brush, and I don't think anybody's intended to do that. But I think we really need to move forward, and I think you guys have a responsibility to make sure that you paint a proper picture, yes, so that people can know what the challenges are, so they can figure out how to navigate their way through this thing. You know?
Thank you very much.
So
yes.
Yes, Pamela, I have a question for you. How come when you guys was in power, since we was in power, that you had to give up your second job, and these guys are not allowed to be part-time MPs now? You got a premier that's in charge of a gas station fleet. You got some kind of donkey fella down there in charge of the milk cows. I mean, what's with all this? You guys got laid, you got out of power, and you lost your job. Come on now. The old contractor can't leave. Right. Okay.
Just for clarification of the panel, at the time, due to the demands of the Premier requested a full-time cabinet. That was my understanding. At one point, I believe Minister Miners had a part-time job, but she was also asked to go full-time.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the reason why was because it was intended to people to do the job, and because of the crisis we were facing, it was not meant for people to sort of have to, well, look, I got to look at my watch, I have to leave to go see my other boss. So.
I mean, here's what I'd say. There's a lot of things that don't make sense about the Home Bermuda Alliance government, but here's one of the things that make the least bit of sense. They have part-time ministers, and let's be clear. The reason why they didn't give up their job is because they didn't want to give up their job. They didn't want to lose. They didn't want to lose their income. So whatever cuts they talk about, etc., that's it. But I think what people need to make sure is clear is that, and it comes to this whole smoke and mirrors thing. It's this whole, we're going to create this picture in the media, and we're going to spend government money and put ads in the Royal Gazette, which is what they're doing, about all this stuff of which we're doing and why our policies are great for Bermuda. But here's the thing. Their part-time cabinet ministers, for the last 3 months, are being paid a full-time salary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the type of stuff, you know, that we'll say it in the floor of the House, we'll say it to the media afterwards, report it, never read about it in the Royal Gazette. But these are the facts. The facts are that they are being paid full-time for part-time work. And that's been happening for the last 3 months. And this And these are the types of things that it's our job to expose, and we will continue to expose them. We will continue to talk about it on the doorstep, and we'll continue to talk about it in forums like this, because I think it's very important that we understand what is going on. And without forums like this, without us canvassing, without persons like you to take the message that we have and spread it around so people can understand, people will be oblivious to what's going on, because I'll be very clear, and experience has shown you, the media is not going to report on the foolishness that these people are getting away with.
Okay, we'll take time for one more question.
I'm from constituency 33. Former terrorist. I made it clear to him that I didn't vote for him. I voted for the Progressive Labor Party. That's all of my life. Right. I used to brag about constituency 33 being a constituency that had never been anything other than PLP. Now, with that said, I feel like I'm out in the wilderness as far as representation, and I expressed that to him. The meeting was based on his reason as to why he left the PLP. And it was a lot of doom and gloom in it. Now, I'm getting utterances of doom and gloom just listening. I purposely been here listening, because I listen better than I speak. But what I'm going to say, I like to think I say what I mean and I mean what I say. I think the PLP failed miserably because they took a few people along, but the masses, they certainly left us. And it's going to be hard to counteract that. And in spite of your shortcomings and failures, I still support the PLP because that's what I know. My life has been surrounded. I mean, I've never become a member because one time I was told membership has its privileges. I don't like privilege. I don't like privilege because of certain affiliations. Now, that doesn't change my views and support because I was around, much like Ro. I came through that era. We were the iconic poster children through integration, they called it, Montenegrin soldiers, and I didn't like none of it. It hardened my feelings. Going off to England to school hardened them more. But the thing is, what I want to know from the PLP is where to from here. Patrick, who just spoke. I was in the international business when he came along. I was watching Patrick when he was away in school. I watched his whole progress. He had the demeanor to become what he is. I didn't, because I was considered a radical, outspoken, non-compliant, because I had personal views. And my views were that aligned with the Progressive Labor Party. Now, what I see here now, on the national scale as far as Bermuda is concerned, is that we've gone full circle to the 1960s and 70s. That being that we now have a camouflage UBP in power. We all know that they're there to represent the business community. Why they haven't left their jobs? I'll tell you why. Because they're there in power to represent their jobs. They're there, those are their lobbyists. Those are who got the feet to the fire. What I expect for the PLP to do, have the feet to the fire and hold them accountable. I'm pissed off about the term now. Okay? I'm pissed off that the PLP allowed that to happen. And that should never die. Okay, they're restructuring the immigration policy and all that. I can categorically state the immigration. I'm not speaking of the political side. I'm talking about the civil service aspect is an absolute joke. Nothing against immigrants. I'm married to a foreigner, so that's neither here nor there. That's why my position. The immigration civil service is a joke. Why? Because I watched for 6 months under the Progressive Labor Party tenure, and I brought Mr. Lister in on it. I watched a house built next to me. Not one Bermudian. Not one. From the time they came to chop the trees down, dig the hole in the ground, lay the foundation, it was in one Bermuda, right next door to me. I went to the immigration. I went to the ombudsman. I done all the due diligence I thought was correct. Slap in your face, kicked in your butt. It's a joke. And that was under your tenure. Your tenure. That boom, that construction boom here was under the PRP tenure. And during that time, I could go the length and breadth of this island and see sites like what he was saying up South Shore. Up and down this island. I'm a taxi operator. I get in all those little nooks and crannies that the average person don't get to see. They're all out Pine Shores where I was working today. They're all out Tuckerstown. They're all over the place where we don't go.
And our young men are unemployed.
They're like cockroaches. You turn the lights on, they scatter. I went over to that joint site adjacent to me, with my camera. They ran. You understand me? I'm pissed off at the PRP. And until I'm not going to sway because I don't have no choice. It's either you or them. And I'm not going there. As much as my constituent, the member in my constituency, as much as she tried, because I come from a fairly large family. So she was trying to get us all. But it weren't not going to happen. They made me march to the Phil's remark on block. Green. But that's okay. I had a hard time, mind you, persuade my son who was about to vote for the second time to vote PLP. And no pun intended, his cousin was once the premier of this country. His cousin, not mine. But the thing is, I'm going to tell you, you guys, you ain't, like Patrick said, you ain't putting the shit on the table. Y'all gotta put it on the table. Feed these people the information they need. Feed the truth. The truth. It will set you free. As long as y'all going on there, he called it some term. It was a little bit about me, but I call it BSing. As long as y'all going around there BSing, I'm speaking the people's language. You ain't got, it's not gonna change. You need to get hard and fast about what's going on here. These people are going to ride us for 5 years. I hate it. Why? Because I'm amongst them. I drive them. I see how they talk. These suits are here. They're coming thick and furious. You reading today's paper? Rental units are escalating. Why? Because they're coming. It ain't nowhere else in the world they want to do business but here. But they're not going to do it under you guys. They're going to make these guys look good. They will take their money and prop them up. Just like the UBP did. I work for a company that every year guaranteed, for the 15 years I worked for them, they were guaranteed millions on April Fool's Day. The day of the new budget. From the Bermuda government, which was then the United Bermuda Party. All the directors were UBP people. Guaranteed. Why they could talk to you guys about friends and family, they had 30 years to test it out. Yeah. They took care of our friends and family. That's why they could tell you guys about that. Because they knew. And they're going to do the exact same thing. But my proposal to you is, and I expect this of you in order to retain my vote, is to keep the fire to their feet. Every nook and cranny, go into it. Every maneuver they make sure it's exposed, because they're going to do the exact same thing. One of your colleagues mentioned about you were too much like the UBP. You're damn straight, because that's what I was told at the end of your tenure. You became too much like the very people you destroyed. Now what I'm asking is, you guys need to step it up. I'm expecting a lot of you. Terry Lister didn't paint no good picture. I've known him all my life. He didn't paint a good picture. I know he is a numbers guy. I know that. I have a daughter studying the same thing. But the thing is, you guys, I want to know from all of you, where to from here, and how we going to get here. That's all I have to say.
Big M on that. Yeah, big M on that.
And if they don't step it up, there are the people who must have to step it up. Because we can't do this.
I don't mind. Can we close it?
Yeah, big M on that. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir, what's your name?
Randy Bean. A lot of
Good.
a lot of Razzie Beans, so you can call me Snoop Spin.
Mr. Lee, thank you very much for your commentary. And I think that it's important because what you said goes back to what happened on December 17th. And what happened on December 17th is that not everyone was like you. Not everyone was like you that said, you know what, y'all are doing a good job, and I'm going to still support the party and hope that you get better and vote for you. A lot of people just said, you know what, they embraced that feeling of they're no better than them. I'm not going to vote for them. I'm not going to vote for them either. I'm staying home. And that's what contributes to what happened to us on December 17th. So in regards to what you're saying, it is about being honest. And I think that our leader set the right tone insofar as saying that there are things that we didn't do right, and we have to learn, we have to humble ourselves and make sure we do a better job going forward. So it's up to us to not only to represent the views of our constituents, but come up with a plan and a way going forward that represents the best for our people, and not to be scared, to put the issues on the table, not to be afraid. I think a lot of the problem with governance is we were afraid of what the World Gazette was going to say about what we did the next day. They were going to say bad stuff about us anyways, no matter how we did it. And I think part of our doing is we just have to be bold, and we have to be committed in making sure that we say, you know what, we're going to take care of politics, in my view, is taking care of the people who vote for you. That's it. And our job is to make sure we take care of people who vote for us. As you said, you can be certain that the One Bermuda Alliance is going to take care of the people who voted for them and who gave them money. So I think from that perspective, we did not do a good enough job last time around, and I hope that within 5 months or 5 years, we put together a plan that reflects what this party is about and the way to move forward. And I myself, as I started this night by saying, I have a lot to learn. And I learned a lot tonight. I took down a lot of notes, and some of the things which were said tonight are right where I feel it, because there are things that we did not do as best as we can. But this is an opportunity that I feel we need to get together, and we need to make sure that the second time around, we do it a lot better than the first time around.
I'll be asked as old to speak, but I think my colleague just about said it all. But I would like to say that I do feel your passion, because I only do a step. I got that a lot. And one of the things that we fell short on was that we somehow thought, and I'm saying because I was a part of the government, we felt that good governance meant that we couldn't take care of our own, because that where corruption was always there. Anytime we tried to do something for our own, we were always concerned with good governance, transparency, all of which is good. But every time we take care of it, it doesn't equal corruption. I always had an issue with that. And I think that's another lesson that we have learned. The former UP took care of it, and like it or not, it was 5 months or 5 years, the UPS can take care of it. And we have to recognize that you are the people that put us there, and we have to listen and acknowledge where we went wrong and what we have to do to get back into our government and maintain it. So I do feel your passion.
Not more I can add to what my colleagues said. I can tell you, Mr. Bean, that it's already started, that process. A lot more listening like we are doing tonight. A lot more knocking on doors. A lot more catching heat too when we knock on those doors. And just being honest with ourselves and listening to you, I think is one of the best approaches that we can take. Our policies going forward will be different. They will, I believe, and they've already started, of ensuring that they represent what you want for the Bermuda that you put us in government to represent. And that will be a part of what we are doing going forward. This event, like events going forward, are going to be more of this. And I don't mind if you come again and tell us the same thing, Mr. B. Because it is important that we hear that and understand that we have a lot of work to do. And we're committed to that work. That's why all my colleagues are here, and we will continue to do our best to listen to you so that we can be better the next time around.
Yeah, it's been a great night tonight, and it's nice to have a fellowship with all of you here. We need to take these public relations baths with the people that we represent so that we don't forget who we represent. You know, it's interesting that what Mr. Burke said just now. You know, in 2007, I thought we were, during that election and leading up to it, you know, we ran a pretty honest campaign. We were willing to speak honestly about some of the key issues. We weren't trying to appease our enemies, or our opponents, rather, to use more diplomatic language. I mean, one easy. So where did we go wrong? I believe we went wrong by trying to appease those who did not have our best interest at heart. In part, I think that was one of the key reasons. But now, again, we need to move forward, and we need to present a dynamic, innovative, and progressive vision, not one that is mired in the way it used to be. As Mr. Tannick alludes, we can't go back there. Those days, golden or otherwise, are over. But we can translate our values into a 21st century context to produce a progressive model for the future that ensures that our people are going to be part of this journey, are going to play an intrinsic and substantial part in Bermuda's future. That remains our challenge, and it remains something that I am deeply and profoundly committed to. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
As we close this evening, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, and just to remind you and to inform you that these will be ongoing throughout the community every month. We have a rare occasion to have back-to-back town hall meetings, and tomorrow at the Temperance Hall across from Shelley Bay Marketplace, there'll be an open mic night for constituencies 4, 5, and 6. MPs Derek Burgess and Wayne Ferbert will be on hand to take questions from the public, and the other panelists will include former Progressive Labor Party MP Mr. Arthur Hudson and former Senator Laverne Ferbert. And our host there will be Ms. Tanae Ferbert. As we leave, I just want to share this with you. Our leader was called away. He actually had dental surgery today. He was recovering from that, so he could not speak and share to you his thoughts. But there's a saying that victory has many fathers and defeat is an orphan. And we, as we rebuild the Progressive Labor Party, it is not just the work of the MPs. It is the work we are doing at nights where you share your views, your ideas, and the direction of the party. This is your party, whether you are a member or not, whether you're a supporter fully or not. Your views shape the organization. And so we thank you for coming out. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your feedback. And as we build the new vision, the new direction with our new leader, we hope that you'll continue to support us in many different ways. Thank you for coming, and good night.